Good morning. My name is Adero Robinson, and I serve as the Executive Director here with City of Columbus. And I'd like to welcome you to this episode of the Red Jacket Roundtable. The Red Jacket Roundtable is a series of conversation with nonprofit leaders in Central Ohio to discuss important topics related to youth development and youth advocacy in our community. So I'm very happy for today's guest today. So our guest is Sonya, who is the Executive Director at Huckleberry House. Since 1970, Huckleberry House has provided emergency shelter and support for the homeless/runaway youth of Central Ohio. Huck House helps provide youth who are struggling with homelessness, family conflict, poverty, and violence. Their services include housing programs. They have a crisis shelter, youth outreach, counseling services, and so much more. So, Sonya, if we can just get started, thank you for being here today. We really appreciate you joining us on this episode of Red Jacket Roundtable. Well, maybe we can just start with, tell us a little bit about yourself, talk about your background, how you got into this position, and kind of what's your motivation or what's inspires you to do this work every day.
Well, when people ask me how I got into this work, I always say, how much time do you have? Because it really is like a whole life coming together to be in this work. I first toured Huck House back in 2005 when I was on the board of the Junior League of Columbus, and we were just learning about youth serving organizations in Columbus. And Huck House's mission just really stuck with me. I was kind of in the for-profit world. I was doing some consulting, mostly insurance work, marketing projects. But when my kids started driving and I had more time during the day and it was time to really go back to work full time, I decided in conversation with my husband that fundraising was what I always loved. It had been a passion that I kind of lived through my volunteer work with the Junior League, with Local Matters, with my kids' school. So to be able to do nonprofit fundraising for an organization that had really touched my heart the first time I toured about 12 years before, just really felt like it came full circle. What really struck me about Huck House when I first toured those many years ago was the work around family relationships. I had toddlers at the time, and we were really focused on our communication with them and knowing that a lifelong relationship and strong communication with our children would be the key to their future success, and just good relationships for us with our kids. And when I toured Huck House and realized they were filling that gap for so many youth who didn't have that strong foundation with their families and didn't necessarily have the unconditional support that many of us take for granted that we get from our families. So when the opportunity to become the development director at Huck House opened up, it just brought together so much of what I value as a parent, as just a member of a strong community, and bringing in together some of my fundraising skills. And then 2 years after I started as development director, our mutual friend, Becky Westerfelt, had been the longtime director at Huck House, and she was retiring. And I told everyone that I'd stick around and see if I liked the new executive director and decide if I would stay. And then the board hired me to become the executive director. And that was right at the beginning of the pandemic. So that's kind of how I got to this work. It's not a straight, I started in nonprofit management and moved in the pathway that a lot of people take, but it really was kind of a winding path that brought a lot of things that mattered to me together.
That's a cool story, how you kind of, navigated into this role. You mentioned that you started as the executive director right when the pandemic hit. Mm-hmm. Now, what were the services looking like pre-pandemic, and then how were you able to make those adjustments when COVID hit?
Yeah, so not by any kind of design other than timing. We had already planned to move into an apartment complex that we were purchasing. So we purchased Kenmore Square, a 56-unit apartment complex, on March 6th of 2020, which was my first day as executive director. And then in August of 2020, we began providing services at a brand new permanent supportive housing unit for Community Housing Network owns the building, and we provide the services for 40 young people in a permanent supportive building. So we already knew that our housing was going to grow, and that had to continue. And despite the pandemic, the need is still there, obviously. We have long wait lists for housing for 18 to 24-year-olds. I think the big impact that we felt was when kids went home from school, and I'm going to talk now about our crisis shelter that serves 12 to 17-year-olds. When they went home from school and they were not in environments where adults were interacting with them regularly at school, on athletic teams, at community centers or libraries, or the places that really are touch points for young people, we saw fewer and fewer young people accessing our teen crisis shelter. In a normal year, we see 550 to 600 teenagers seek safety and shelter at Huck House. And during the pandemic, those numbers went down to about 450 to 500. And we know that was not because there was less need. I mean, we all know that the needs of the youth were probably even greater during like the real intense months of the pandemic, but they weren't being recognized by adults who would often help them get to Huck House. We weren't doing school assemblies. You know, there weren't 300 kids getting together in a middle school gymnasium to learn about resources in the community. So we've really, we struggled at just getting the word out to young people who would normally hear about us in places they couldn't be during the pandemic. We're seeing those numbers come back up, but it's still something we're thinking about. How do we reach young people in different ways now, considering they might not all be in-person places?
Absolutely. And when a young person comes to the Huck House, because you're located in the Wyland Park community, right?
Yeah.
And when a young person comes, sometimes they can be referred to you in some cases, or where folks like come riding off the street saying, hey, I'm having an issue at home, I need a place, I need some assistance. How do you work with those young folks that are just, hey, they heard about Huck House and they show up on the front step?
Yeah, that, and that's really what Huck House was created to be, was the place you could, knock on the front door, it would be unlocked, and you could come in and get the safety and the support that you need. We still do that. And I'd say probably maybe half of the young people that come through the front doors of Huck House have come on their own. We do have a partnership with we're the National Safe Place Agency in Central Ohio. So there are these yellow signs that look kind of like a traffic sign. And those are on fire stations, Donato's restaurants, all the Columbus libraries, some area libraries. But young people can walk into those buildings and say, I need to get to safety, and they call us and we get them to Huck House. So when a young person comes in, right away we try to identify, well, what's the crisis they're dealing with? And in most cases, it is a breakdown in family relationships, family communication. We have such a talented team of social workers and therapists who dig right in as quickly as possible. If the young person is willing and the families are willing to do therapy together or to do crisis counseling together, that's where we see the most success. So a lot of times it's just about fighting fair. We like to say that. Can you fight fair? Can you disagree and not let it become physical? Can you disagree without running away or getting kicked out? Because if you can, that's the best place to be. If it can be safe, the best place to not be without a home is in your home. So we find that in a typical crisis stay for a 12 to 17-year-old, it's about a week long, and there's a lot of counseling, individual, and then in groups with the other young people staying in the shelter, then also with family, in the best case scenario. And we always tell the young people, if you've been here a week and you feel like you're ready to go home, that's great, but call us, it's ongoing support. And then, of course, if you ever feel you have to run away again or you get kicked out again, come to Huck House. Please don't be sleeping outside. So, that's kind of the foundation of Huck House from 1970, and it continues today. Though we do work with, we take a lot of referrals from schools and, libraries, but also we work with Franklin County Children's Services. So when they have minors who are waiting for a more permanent placement, they might stay with us for a couple months while that's all getting worked out. So
I'm curious, well, you mentioned you get referrals from schools from time to time. For some of the young people that come in, how are their relationships with their respective schools? Does it vary? Are they doing poorly in school? Is there like a correlation between what they're dealing with in their homes, their school background? Are they still seeing challenges in both spaces?
yeah, I guess I probably don't have statistics around that, but I would say just anecdotally that, any person, no matter their age, if they're dealing with stress at home, it does play out, right? At work or at school. So, if a guidance counselor or a teacher is aware that, wow, something just seems kind of off, or I've noticed that over time, behaviors have changed or needs have changed. I think they probably are recognizing it in the class or, on the playground. So, and getting in touch with us. I think schools that have great guidance counselors and, social workers on their staff are able to, send kids to Huck House. I know, the city year core members are often that extra adult in a room and might be recognizing. So we do depend on our community partners, not just the schools and the libraries, but all the organizations in town that are supporting young people with whatever they're dealing.
I've had the chance, over the years to, tour the space and learn more about the services and kind of see them in action. And I think it's really cool that when you walk into the Huck House, that there's, it's an inviting atmosphere, and the staff, they're really cool and really great, and they connect with the kids. But there's also these, these amenities that sorry, there's loud noise out there. There's a lot of amenities that you have a kitchen, you have a really, I think we have the kitchen, you have like games, you have spaces where young people can have conversations, places where they sleep. It's just really open. And I'm curious about when youth come into a space like that, they're like, oh, do you actually have this? I can get food here. I can play video games. I can, just chill without having those stressors that maybe brought them there in the first place.
Right. I mean, we use the word respite quite a bit.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just need a break from whatever that stress is, and to kind of be removed from a stressful environment, to focus on, healing and doing the hard work of figuring out what's going on and how can I use my strengths to get through what I'm dealing with. I think people have an image of, we use the word shelter, and people have seen on TV and in the movies, row after row after row of bunk beds, and, it's not very welcoming. Huck House was built as a single family mansion back in the early 1900s, and it still is. We really try to keep it as a home. So yeah, the kitchen, everybody gets 3 meals a day, but we always have fruit and snacks in the pantry that they can help themselves to. We have laundry facilities. The room where most people hang out during the day is the TV lounge, that we call it the family room. But there are also some spaces a little separate from that where they can do art. We have board games and cards. We have a game room that has an Xbox, and kids can hang out in there. We do expect that there always be a Huck House staff member or adult volunteer in the room with you. So it's not kind of go and do whatever you want. There's oversight and fair discipline. A lot of the group counseling activities are fun. They're playing games, and find that sometimes the camaraderie between the youth, just to realize wow, I'm not the only one who's not getting along with my parents right now, or I'm not the only one whose family has been evicted, or I'm not the only one. It kind of helps just to have other young people going through the same types of things that you can talk to and get ideas. But I think sometimes just knowing you're not alone helps a lot.
Okay, yeah,
So.
absolutely. That's really cool that young people can be in that space and feel comfortable. You had mentioned earlier that you have, your 12 to 17-year-old, and then you have the housing program where young people a little bit older than that could access more permanent living solutions. Can you talk a little bit about that? How does that work for young people?
Yeah, so we know that in Central Ohio, between 3,000 and 4,000 young people every year experience homelessness. And when we say young people, we're talking probably that measurement is more like the 12 to 24. We know that each year in Columbus, between 900 and 1,000 young people between the ages of 18 and 24 access the adult shelter system. I like to say, and my sons are 20 and 22, nothing magical happened when they turned 18. They still needed as much support as they did when they were 17 years, 364 days. So to assume that just because someone has turned 18, they belong in the adult system is really, it's not accurate, and it's not fair to the young person who's trying to figure things out. So we're really lucky in Columbus. Huck House is part of the Community Shelter Board's continuum of care. And we have a youth system now after some special investment and planning that we were able to do after a HUD project a few years ago. So not only do we have lots of different types of housing projects, but I'll start at the beginning, that our youth outreach team serves as the coordinated access point. So any organization in town that encounters an 18 to 24-year-old who's experiencing homelessness knows they should send them to Huck House, to our coordinated access team. And they do all the paperwork and get them on the lists for the different housing that's available to 18 to 24-year-olds. We also then have 3 locations for housing. We have Kenmore Square, which we purchased in 2020, and that's 56 units. The really cool thing there is that it's not just Huck House youth, but we also have master leases. So there are young people from Home for Families and Kaleidoscope and the Center for Healthy Families. So it's really become a youth community for 18 to 24-year-olds. Chances are the young people living there don't know which program they're in, because everybody has access to the same programs and the same support, the same caseworkers and the same therapists from Huck House. There's a community room or a community building in the center of the complex. So it's really starting to feel more like a campus, kind of like a college campus, and there are activities in the community room. I like being there in the summer, that we've always got tents set up so people can be hanging out outside. We've had a couple of cookouts this summer. So Kenmore Square is really special to us because it's kind of I like to think of it as a great model for how we can end youth homelessness. Most of the young people that live there will be there 18 months, rent-free, but really more important than the place to live is the work that we can do while they're living there. So working on therapy, if there's trauma that we need to help them address, working on education, job skills. Half of the young people at Kenmore Square have children of their own, so we have a parent mentor on site to address that. We have a wellness mentor on site to talk to them about what they need to be doing to stay healthy. Columbus Public Health brings their mobile unit twice a month, and just other organizations are, coming on campus to provide resources to the young people. In addition to Kenmore Square, we have our 20 units at the Jefferson Avenue Center. So that is just Huck House Transitional Living. And then I mentioned earlier our permanent supportive building that is owned and operated by Community Housing Network, which is down on the southeast side of town. That's a really special model as well. Permanent supportive usually means someone will go to a facility and live there for the rest of their lives. I don't know an 18 to 22, 24-year-old who believes that their current situation is their permanent situation. So really what the word permanent does is give us more time than the traditional transitional program that's 18 months. So if someone needs to stay at Marshbrook Place for a couple of years or 4 years, 5 years, we have more time to work on, more serious needs that they might have. But in all of those locations, people are getting therapy, case management, they're working on life skills, education and employment. So, and we have great success. We like to brag that since 1990, when we started our transitional living program, 90% of our graduates have not returned to homelessness again in the time that we're still in touch with them. So, and I think for the young people that we serve, that's really important because it's life-changing for those individuals. Depending on who I'm talking to about funding or support, it's also important to know that anyone who goes through our transitional living program and can then live independently, successfully, does not need to use the adult shelter system. So as an adult. So we hope that by bringing down the youth numbers, we are bringing down future adult numbers as well in the shelters.
So it sounds like you have some really, excuse me, really good partnerships and good programming for these young folks that are designed to not get, for them to continue on the challenging path. And you mentioned about the young people getting access to job skills and employment services. Now, do your counselors help them with that, or you partner with other organizations to kind of help them find a job or get them in a position to be able to get employment and sustain it for a period of time?
Yeah, so it's a lot of everything. So I think depending on the young person and depending on, what's available at the time, but we do work with organizations like Impact and Youth Build. So yeah, there have been at different times, different employment opportunities, but our youth outreach team, not only are they reaching out to youth, but they're bringing in the organizations to work with youth. So absolutely trying to bring in even sometimes individual employers. We've had different companies come and do recruitment at our campuses and buildings. But then in some cases, just working individually, we have a young man in one of our buildings who, we didn't really know how work would go for him. So his case manager went with him to apply for a job at Wendy's. And I think they allowed that case manager kind of to hang out for a little while, first few days, and make sure it was going well. So, sometimes we find great employers who really want to work with us to see success for the young people. So sometimes it's just an individual situation too. Sometimes young people will come in and say, I know where I want to work and I'm going to do this. And, if they're that driven, their case managers will certainly try to make that happen. So,
you made a good point earlier on about the trauma that young people may be experiencing when they, come into your, to receive your services. And I think about kind of what we do at City, like we're in the classrooms and many of our core members may see students who may be experiencing some sort of trauma, and it can hit you, right? So, and as a caretaker, as someone who's serving young people and serving multiple young folks who are dealing with different things, sometimes those things can attach onto you, even though you're trying to, sometimes you don't want to take those things home, but you're thinking about that young person, it's the weekend, I'm not going to see them until Monday. What are they experiencing? And that's kind of internalizing some of those things. And we always talk about, the caretakers being able to take care of themselves. How are they being able to take options to be able to, self-care for themselves in doing this work, right? Taking care of the caretakers. And your folks are dealing with young people that's constantly coming in and having challenges, and they're navigating and they're trained to do that. But how do folks that are working with young people with challenges, what are some of the suggestions and ideas and thoughts and opinions you have on how we can be better stewards of our own mental health and physical health when pouring so much into others who need our services?
Yeah, we absolutely recognize that, especially, in the summer of 2020, there was so much violence in our community and people just weren't able to take breaks from everything that was happening. And then when you think about, teams like ours, like City and Huck House, that work was really taking a toll on people. So we talk a lot about the secondary trauma and that you do start to take it on. We started a trauma response committee at Huck House so to be supporting our staff. So we looked at planning for when big things happen. How do we go into action? We've also made a point of really honoring loss. So we've had a few situations where former clients have lost their lives. that we really address that, name it, recognize it, and be, have a way to support one another. We have a bi-monthly support group for staff members who might just be experiencing some trauma related to their job. But we also have, we've got this great counseling program here at Huck House that all of the young people go through. And we also provide counseling for community members out in some schools too. So we find that the therapists actually start providing not therapy, but guidance to the rest of the staff. So, when things come up, recommending like this weekend, just don't watch the news and be sure that you get outside in nature. So we really depend on our therapists to kind of give us pointers too of, just ways to detach when you can. But a big part of our training is about setting boundaries and really recognizing, this isn't just a job. This is really hard work that our teams are doing, and it is hard to separate. So we encourage them to really, when we have a generous PTO bank. So when you go to PTO, really, let your clients know you're not going to be available. Tell them who they can contact so that when you shut off your phone, you feel okay about it. But you're absolutely right. I know that they all worry all weekend and overnight about what's going on with the young people. They start to care so much work. You don't do this work if you don't really care about the young people.
Absolutely, that's a great point. I wanted to switch a little bit, and I said thank you for sharing all the work that you all are doing, because it's such a valuable service. But I'm thinking in terms of as you're doing your work on the ground, and are there any advocacy type activities that your organization does, or being part of a larger network and with your other partners? Are there any other things that are happening at the county level, state level, national level that we should be knowing about as it relates to young people who are experiencing crisis in the way that you're serving?
Sure. So, gosh, so much. That's a really big topic. So I'll start by saying that Huck House, we often get categorized as a housing organization, or that we serve homeless youth. But back in 1970, when we started, we were really a mental health agency, and our largest funding still is based in mental health through the Adam H. Board and Medicaid. So we're in the housing system, we're in the mental health system, and we're in the child welfare system. So I think that puts us in a really unique situation, because we can go to housing system meetings and hear things and then be able to share, oh yeah, but in the mental health world, we're doing this, or for children, for minors. So I think especially during COVID, we were getting pulled into planning meetings with each of those systems. And we were able to be the touch point to say, oh, but we're duplicating because this system's already doing this, or this system has forgotten that. So we do, I have a deep appreciation for collaboration. I think that we are obviously stronger when we work together. So I'd say in the youth system, we're so lucky to have partners like Kaleidoscope, the Center for Healthy Families, and Star House, where we can all communicate about what works well for the young people we're serving. There are a lot of young people who access multiple services from different organizations. So the more we can be in communication and sharing, the better we can serve those young people. Obviously, we're members of the Human Service Chamber of Franklin County, and what a powerhouse that organization became for us over the past few years, not just acting locally, but really, addressing needs at a national and state level as well now. So I think we have benefited so much from having a unified voice with all the other organizations doing heart work in our community. And then I'd say, just being part of the housing system as well. There are just so many resources that come to us from that. But on an advocacy level, I think we're very worried about any anti-LGBTQIA+ legislation that we fear might be coming our way. Many of the youth that we serve are part of that community, and we know that just the trauma around not being recognized is very damaging for the young people we serve. So I think that's always concerning to us. Maybe not as interesting to your audience, but I think something a lot of executive directors are thinking and talking about these days is just funding and restricted funding. Huck House has traditionally received a lot of government funding. Not only is that flat and sometimes decreasing, but it's also very restrictive. So when we know what would be best for us to do as an agency, but to be told we're not allowed to spend our money that way is frustrating. So really thinking about, for example, the city just spent some of their ARPA dollars on the Elevate grants. And they said, this is operational, go spend this the way you know you need to spend it. And it was kind of, a new thing for many of us to say, wow, they're trusting us to figure out. I mean, the city has always trusted us, but to say this funding is for you to spend the way you know you need to spend it. That was big for us. So
I'm glad you mentioned that, the funding piece, because I was going to talk about that a little bit. And there was the unrestricted dollars. As another executive director, I know exactly what you're talking about, and it is a conversation that I think a lot of executive directors for nonprofits are having. I mean, we're hearing the conversation all the time, and I'm curious in terms of your funding. Really, in my opinion, a lot of our funding really links to how we're telling our story, right? And how we're showing impact, how we're showing that we're providing those services that are, one, they are hard work, and it is hard work. But I'm curious in terms of, because I was looking over some of your materials again, and I'm seeing all the really cool stories of the young people that you're working with. Is there, and it's really linked to how you'll be able to bring in resources and volunteers and your board members and sharing the story of impact. Is there any one young person that you serve that kind of comes to mind, like that story is constantly, you're thinking about, oh, we really had an impact on that young person?
Oh, to pick one.
There's several, but
yeah. Well, and we do, at our board meetings, we always start with a mission moment. And some of the guidance, and you've probably been told this too, some of the funders are saying, you tell us all your success stories. So it makes it sound like everything's great. But they also want to know our hardships. And I'm going to try to get better at that, talking really about like some of the struggles that we have. But so our mission moments are usually success stories. And one that we've shared recently is a young man, and because he's in our annual report, I feel comfortable. He's given us permission to share his story, because we always take that very seriously, that we're not talking about the youth without their permission. Chester came to us right as he was turning 18. So we made an exception for him to come to the shelter. He had been at Children's Hospital and really physically and emotionally was not 18. We think he was probably functioning more as about a 12 or 13-year-old. He had some health issues. He stayed in the shelter even longer than he should have. We were waiting for our permanent supportive building to open. So while in his time at the shelter, he's also deaf. So we had to work on a lot of physical things with him. We taught him, a lot about hygiene, and took him shopping, interacting with young people. So really just kind of getting him, he had come from a really difficult situation where he was not really interacting with people. So some of that foundational work was able to start in our shelter, but when Marshbrook Place opened up, here was a young man who, a few months earlier was like in the hospital, not knowing that he was allowed to make decisions for himself as an 18-year-old, moved into his own apartment. And again, the support from our staff, I have to say, we all kind of loved Chester and would do anything for him. But to see him move into his apartment and start learning how to cook and clean and take care of his apartment. And we have cute videos from his case manager of him complaining as he was cleaning his apartment, just like any other 18 or 19-year-old. But he was the young man who said he wanted a job. He wanted a job because he wanted to buy some Nintendo games, and he had things he wanted to purchase on his own. So his case manager driving him to Wendy's, which is actually walking distance. So he is able to get to work on his own now. But, to see him hired and then to get promoted pretty quickly to be working the grill, and just to see that his team listened to what he wanted to do and helped him set those goals and work towards it. I also appreciate, the other young people in the Marshbrook community, really looking out for him and making sure that he was getting on the right bus to go wherever he was going, and celebrating the wins and birthdays, and really taking him on as they kind of a family member in that community there. At Marshbrook, there's a basketball court and a playground and outdoor shelter with a grill, so they really have it set up so that the young people can spend time together. And to see somebody embraced by a community, who didn't really have a community before he came to Huck House, feels really good. And to see him achieving his goals and feeling successful at what he's doing, I think for some of us, we take that for granted, that we get up and do what we set out to do every day. But for him, that wasn't really a given. So yeah, we talk about him a lot. But I will share another one if you've got a minute. We had a young woman who came to us, and it was a domestic violence client. She was being abused by her stepfather. When she came to us, and her confidence was incredibly low. But in her time living at our apartments and working with a therapist, she really found her voice and her individuality. And she started working at Amazon in the warehouse, and is now, she's graduated and moved on, and I'll tell you where she's living in a minute. But she moved on at Amazon, and now travels around the country helping them set up new distribution centers. So she's a success story, no matter where your journey begins, but from where she started, especially to have found her voice and to do that. One thing in our housing programs that we like to talk about is that we set up a rent account for every young person. So when they start working, they are supposed to give us 30% of their income every month. We call it a rent account to get them used to paying rent, because when they're with us, they're not. When they graduate, there is going to be rent for them to pay somewhere. The rent account is actually a savings account that we return to the young person when they graduate from the program. So this young woman, Srijana, when she started working at Amazon, was setting aside more than 30% every month. And when she graduated, she had enough for a down payment on a house. Wow. So she went from living in our fully funded apartments to a management position at Amazon in living in a house that she had purchased.
Wow. That's an amazing story. That's a real success story right there.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I love to hear stories like that. And, because we're all doing really good work, and maybe in some different areas, but to hear a story like that, that's amazing. You would help that young person do that.
Yeah. And it is fun to share the stories, because again, talk about life-changing, those two stories I just shared for those people. But if you just think about what a better community we are when everyone gets to participate fully. Mm-hmm. And I think that's our goal, a thriving community, of youth thriving, no matter what the journey has been. So that, we're just, if everybody could be doing and, contributing and thriving, how strong Columbus would be.
Absolutely. I agree. Those are some great, those two stories about Chester and the other young lady, those are cool stories. But I'm sure that anyone would love to hear. I'm curious, I know we have about, 5-10 minutes left in our conversation. So I appreciate your time this morning. But I was wondering, you had talked about that you had 3 apartment communities, I believe you mentioned. Where are those located geographically in Columbus? And do you have plans to expand to other communities?
So my coworkers tell me all the time, no more buildings, slow down, because we added those 2 very close to each other. So Kenmore Square is in South Linden. And when we purchased Kenmore Square, it was a HUD property under the management of Columbus Metropolitan Housing Authority. They needed to sell it because it wasn't quite big enough to be efficient for them. The great thing about how we acquired the building was that when it was appraised, there was the lowest appraisal rate and then the highest appraisal rate, ranging from 700,000 to 1 point something million, because we were going to be using the building to continue serving a population in need. We were able to purchase it at the lowest rate with a 0% 10-year loan from CMHA. So to me, that's another success that I think other communities should be looking at when there are housing communities that need to be sold by a government agency. Instead of selling it to a for-profit landlord, sell it to a nonprofit who will do good work with it. So anyway, I got off on a tangent there, but that's located kind of near Hudson and Joyce. And it's just an adorable community of brick townhomes and a community center. We have a playground and there's a center green where there's a lot of activity. The 20 units that we rent from Jefferson Avenue Center are near Broad Street, so very close to Columbus State and CCAD, and of course right on the bus line on Broad Street. So that's a great location for some of our young people who are in school at Columbus State. And then the third property, Marshbrook Place, is on Chatterton Road, kind of in the Gender and Refugee Road area on the southeast side. And that that was built brand new, completed in 2020. It's a gorgeous building. What we love about that building is that it's it's one secure front door. So if you think about anyone who has sent someone off to college and they have to live in the dorm their first year, and there's a desk they have to walk past, and that they're secure. There will be programming in their residence hall for them. That's what Marshbrook feels like. We're seeing great success there. And I think it is the sense of community and the sense of security of knowing there is a locked door with somebody, a security guard. So if we could build more buildings or acquire more buildings, that would be the model we would go for. I think, again, I'll reference my own children going off to college, and I know you went to Denison, so you definitely lived in a dorm. You start, those 18-year-olds who are going off from probably highly resourced homes and fairly supported environments. They start with less freedom. I mean, they're in a building with adults, slightly older people there to guide them and make sure they're where they need to be. And then as you get older in a college environment, you maybe get to live in a campus apartment, and then you get to move off campus. And if we could use that same model for young people who are experiencing homelessness, after they've gone through so much trauma, starting in a building where they can see what a healthy community feels like and feel secure and have that guidance right there on site. And then maybe, if you still need some support, then maybe you move to an apartment community like Kenmore Square. But we need to think about the order in which we provide these programs and these housing opportunities to young people. What's developmentally appropriate. So.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I was just curious seeing how you're thinking about serving more, I can see your staff saying no more buildings.
Yeah, I'm aware of a possible opportunity in a few years that would allow us to grow by maybe another 10 or 20 units at one time. And that kind of growth feels a lot better than adding 90 units in a year. But if we could grow a little more slowly and into the appropriate buildings. Kenmore is big, and it's a lot of front doors and back doors. Whereas at Marshbrook, we've got one front door and a couple side doors, but they're locked. So, where we can really watch who are the visitors and, what's happening in the building. So I think if we could grow, we would be a little more selective about the type of building. Our locations actually have worked out pretty well in terms of bus line. Of course, I would love more grocery stores, but I'm a former Local Matters board member, so I would say we need healthy food everywhere in town, not just in certain neighborhoods. So more access to fresh food would be good, I think, at all of our locations. So.
Okay, wow, yeah, thanks for sharing that. I was just curious on kind of the geographically where you're located and where, young people are going. And you're right, there need to, all those amenities that, some of us we take for granted, sometimes they are readily available in those communities. So that's a great comment. We're getting, our time is coming to a close, but I wanted to say, thank you so much for joining me this morning to talk about all of the work and all the good work that you're doing with these young people and their services. I knew a lot of your services, but I'm thinking, oh, wow, I didn't know that part extended so far to help these young people out on their journey and their growth. Are there any other things that you want to share with our audience that you think they should know about your organization and your work and your people?
Wow. Well, I guess, we, especially when it comes to the teen crisis shelter, and I know your core members are working with those middle and high school age kids. We serve youth from every zip code, every school district, private schools, public schools, because what causes young people to not have a place to live is usually, in more than half the cases, a breakdown in family relationships. So we are located right in the middle of town, but we serve youth from all over. So I always encourage people who might be interacting with young people to just be aware and don't assume that everything's okay. And call Huck House if you think you've met a young person who might need some support, even if it's just an adult to talk to. We want to be here for people so that they don't end up sleeping outside.
And if anyone is interested in connecting a young person or family to Huck House, where should they visit? What's like website, and is there a number, a crisis hotline?
Yes. So the website is huckhouse.org, and the crisis line, which is 24 hours, is 614-294-5553. And whatever age you are, if you're calling for a young person or you're 18 years old, they will get you to the right person to talk to, but that line is answered 24 hours a day.
Okay, great. Well, I really appreciate this time, this morning. Learned a lot about your organization. And for those out there that are watching this podcast, this will be posted on Facebook. We'll be tagging Huck House once we get it all uploaded. It'll be on Spotify, YouTube, and some other platform that I have no idea what. There's so many different platforms, but it'll be on several platforms, and it'll be on LinkedIn and other locations, so you get an opportunity to hear more about what Sonya's talking about in their work, and go visit the website and make sure you're referring young people. And we talk about funding. Let's give to these organizations. Right. It's always an opportunity to support in so many different ways. So please visit huckhouse.org, give them a call, volunteer, learn more about this work. So thank you so much for your time this morning. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Adero. And thank you for all that City Year does too. I mean, such an important resource for so many of the young people in our schools. So thank you too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And be on the lookout for new episodes of Red Jacket Roundtable. See you soon.
Thanks.